not my point tonight. My aim is that I'm contending that many current attempts to remediate print comics to digital comics fail to capture the new media spirit described by Bolter and Grusin. That is, most digital comics now do not actively work to improve upon their older counterparts, having just reproduced the content and form verbatim. While this may be an attempt at immediacy, I suggest that such a remediation ultimately proves impossible due to the material affordances of print-based comics. So, to that end, I believe that digital comics are missing an opportunity to embrace their own uniqueness and to explore some things that could make them a little bit different than their print-based comics. And to that then, we can start getting into a little bit more new media theory to see how comics might begin to explore that difference. And we start with ergodic literature. In Cybertext, Espen Aarseth proposes a new theoretical framework to better understand cybertext and digital media, ergodic literature. Aarseth defines ergodic texts as those that require non-trivial effort to allow the reader to traverse the text. Considered by many to be the first gaming theorist, Aarseth also argues that in ergodic literature, the sequence of signs does not emerge in a fixed, predetermined order decided by the instigator of the work, but is instead one actualization among many potential routes. That is, in theory, ergodic literature not only requires significant effort on the part of the reader to construct the narrative, but the narrative experience will be different for each reader because of the decisions each individual reader makes. I believe that these two basic tenets of ergodic literature, non-trivial effort and multiple outcome narratives, can help us better understand the possibilities for digital comics. At the heart of Aarseth's work is a complicated notion of what happens in the interactions between a reader and a text. Interactivity has long come under fire for being nothing more than a buzzword to distinguish new media and digital texts from their print-based ancestors. But as Lev Menovich astutely notes, interactivity is simply too broad of a concept to be of much use to many scholars. He asserts that all texts are, to varying degrees, interactive. He writes that all art is interactive in a number of ways: ellipses in literary narration, missing details of objects in visual art, and other representational shortcuts require the user to fill in missing information. 40 years prior to Menovich, Marshall McLuhan made a similar argument, noting that traditional media such as books or cinema can be interactive and that they require the reader to create some kind of mental accompaniment to their content. Though he argues that there are varying degrees of interactive media, the point that both he and Menovich make is clear. Media is and probably always will be interactive in some way. What makes new media and digital media unique and interesting is not always defined by its interactivity factor. Aarseth's ergodic literature recognizes the vagueness of using the interactivity as a governing concept, and thus looks to offer a new way to consider interaction in new media texts, non-trivial actions designed to affect the narrative's outcome. Not only then does ergodic literature work to reconceptualize the vague notion of interaction as it pertains to new media texts, but it can also help us explore how digital comics can create a new kind of reader-text interaction that is unique to digital media and therefore digital comics. Specifically, the general ideas that govern ergodic literature, non-trivial interaction, and multiple outcome narratives could be modified to discuss new possibilities of digital comics. First, non-trivial interaction offers digital comics quite a bit of opportunity to redefine the reader-text relationship. Intentional choices that a reader makes should, in some way, affect the outcome or narrative of a text. Though obviously I'm going to be sharing some examples after my talk, I'm going to use an early example of a digital comic to demonstrate this principle, Stu Campbell's Nawlz. Described on the official website as an interactive comic that combines text, illustration, music, animation, and interactivity to create a never-before-seen panoramic comic format, Nawlz tells the story of Harley Chambers, a cyber graffiti artist with the power to cast reels throughout the city, and a reel is a technological hallucination for those not in the know. Rooted in the surreal and bizarre, Nawlz requires several reads to grasp the unique interplay of sound, alphabetic text, and animation. The reader-text interaction found in Nawlz broke new ground for digital comics. While it primarily makes use of the point-and-click reader-text interaction found in most digital comics now, there is also a scrolling element involved. Readers can scroll forward or backwards through the text, choosing to skip various chunks of the narrative. Moreover, the kind of pointing and clicking required of the reader is a bit more detailed than clicking the next page link. Rather, readers must find a series of arrows embedded in different images on the screen to unlock content such as accompanying music, animation, and additional dialogue. While most of the arrows must be clicked to move the narrative forward and to make much sense of the story, several of the arrows does provide the reader with extra content that adds to the interactive, immersive experience and contributes to the narrative in a unique way. Additional animated content can be unlocked by searching for semi-hidden mouse-overs. This is a form of non-trivial interaction that A, readers can technically choose how to interact with the text, scrolling or pointing and clicking, and B, that the pointing and clicking requires an additional element to it, searching for the unlockable content. In addition to non-trivial effort, Nawlz also makes use of several modes of communication to provide a different immersive experience for the reader. Put another way, it makes use of the tools afforded to digital comics. And to return this argument to the language of Bolter and Grusin's remediation, it also reminds readers of the medium that they are consuming the comic, thus eschewing immediacy and embracing hypermediacy. However, advocating for more digital comics such as Nawlz that require non-trivial interaction does have its limitations. Chief among them is Arseth's notion of non-trivial interaction. While perhaps less problematic than the term interaction, non-trivial interaction still poses a bit of nebulousness. Specifically, what might be non-trivial to one person may not be non-trivial to another. For example, if we were to use the example of an adventure game, users must use a variety of buttons and joysticks to maneuver and actively make choices. However, after a time, this reader-text interaction becomes second nature and is no longer non-trivial. Put another way, decisions that initially take significant thought may soon become repetitive and just as ordinary as flipping a page. Additionally, some individuals might consider any reader-text interaction to be non-trivial in nature, thus potentially limiting the value or usefulness of ergodic literature. Given the subjectivity of the term, it would seem at first blush that non-trivial interaction has limited use in our discussion of digital comics. But I think that instead the advent of digital comics offers us the opportunity to refine Arseth's notion of non-trivial interaction. Specifically, using the kind of multiple-level interaction demanded by Nawlz, I suggest ergodic texts must offer users varying degrees of interactivity. That is, an ergodic text must offer the reader different kinds of interactions. For example, a combination of pointing, clicking, scrolling, or sliding through in order to make strategic choices about navigating a text. Ultimately, I think one possibility for digital comics is to offer the reader multiple possibilities for how to navigate and thus interact with the narrative. Like Nawlz, a text could offer readers the opportunity to search, scroll, point, and click, but it could also give readers the chance to interact with the text using voice commands and movement. Additionally, if different kinds of interactions reveal different narrative strands in a text, this would force the reader to consider which kind of interaction she or he would engage in. This kind of non-trivial interaction, varied interaction, would certainly expand upon the kind of interaction found in print-based comics, and more importantly, take full advantage of the tools at digital comics' disposal. The second aspect of ergodic literature that offers insight into how digital comics can continue moving forward and by reshaping the reader-text interaction, is the notion of crafting texts that have multiple outcomes in their narratives. The notion of crafting a multiple outcome narrative, or as Arseth refers to it, non-linear or labyrinths, is not necessarily new. In terms of printed texts, R.A. Montgomery's popular Choose Your Own Adventure books, anyone familiar with that? And really sad news about R.A. Montgomery recently passing away. Really quite sad. Those Choose Your Own Adventure books that perhaps many of us grew up with invite readers to make decisions that dramatically affect how the narrative unfolds. While there is still a finite amount of possibilities, it is conceivable that many readers will enjoy many different stories. Interestingly, Pat Mills' limited comic book series Dice Man, which was made in 1986, invites readers to make key choices for each character based on the decisions made by the reader. The outcome changes, just like a choose-your-own-adventure narrative. Daniel Goodbray refers to this as a paper hypercomic, but it could just be as easily be seen as ergodic literature. So one example of a digital comic that embraces this strand of ergodic literature is Scott McCloud's simple story of Carl. Introduced in McCloud's 1993 Understanding Comics, Carl was a character created by McCloud to demonstrate how using the minimal elements of frames and panels can be used to create a story, and more specifically, how adding or subtracting panels can result in the same outcome, but create a very different narrative. On McCloud's website, readers can arrange up to 52 different panels to create several different narratives about Carl by dragging individual panels into a blank canvas. Readers can dictate the order of panels and how many panels construct the narrative. While there are still only a finite amount of outcomes, The point is that the reader gets to influence the narrative by selecting which panels to tell the story. Obviously, this is a very simplistic example of a multiple outcome narrative, but it nonetheless gives a glimpse regarding the potential of the digital comic-reader interaction and in general the possibilities of digital comics. Another way to understand the possibilities of digital comics is through Gerard Genette's theory of hypertext, which is closely related to Bolter and Grusin's remediation. Genette has made the argument that hypertext, which he defines as any text derived from a previous text, either through simple transformation or through indirect transformation, must be able to extend, expand, and amplify the print-based counterpart. He defines extension as augmentation by massive addition, while expansion proceeds not through massive additions, but through a kind of stylistic dilation. And lastly, amplification looks to build on earlier, smaller themes presented in texts that the hypertext is based on. He grounds his notion of amplification in how different storytellers retell and build upon different myths and classic tragedies. These three notions can certainly be applied to digital comics. Certainly, extension, augmentation by addition, mirrors McCloud's notion of infinite canvas, that pages or panels are not a restriction in digital comics and thus can tell sprawling stories that use the computer screen as a window and not as a page. Indeed, Marvel's recent Infinite Comics, an exclusive digital-first comic book line created specifically to be read on mobile devices, cautiously explores how the screen can serve as a window. Using the haptic interface that is becoming increasingly common on mobile devices, readers can enjoy a comic book story digitally, a panel at a time, instead of a page at a time. As Al Ewing, one of the writers for Marvel's Infinite Comics, notes, viewing a story a panel at a time makes every single panel a cliffhanger. While the Infinite Comics line does not necessarily radically change the composition found in traditional print-based comics, it does change how the comic is consumed. Though not quite what McCloud envisioned with his original infinite canvas theory, it still eschews some of the limitations of print by viewing the screen as a window and not as a page. Secondly, expansion through stylistic dilation is akin to digital comics making use of their unique multimedia tools to enhance the narrative told in digital comics' print-based counterparts. Digital comics such as Nawlz demonstrates this, my earlier example, as this kind of digital comics makes use of just about every available mean, alphabetic text, the visual, screen as a window, sound, video, animation, and so forth, to construct their narrative. However, the last notion of hypertext, amplification, allows for a different possibility for digital comics that I have not yet discussed. Using the basic idea of Genette's notion of amplification, I would argue that amplified digital comics could offer more content and build upon themes that were originally presented in floppies or graphic novels. One way that this possibility has been realized is through the use of Marvel's recent Augmented reality, which was introduced in the print version of Marvel's epic story arc Avengers vs. X-Men that was released a few years back. Simply put, print copies of AVX came with these AR icons that unlock extra amplified content for the reader. The first issue in the AVX story arc boasts that the augmented reality is a free application available on camera-enabled Apple iOS or Android devices. Holding the mobile device's camera over any AR icon unlocked extra content, such as original artwork, trailers for future issues, visual character biographies, video commentaries from the artists and writers, and much more. This form of hybrid comic demonstrates how digital tools can be used to amplify their print-based counterparts. Specifically, augmented reality does not necessarily retell a narrative, but rather offers different extras that build upon the narrative found in the print-based floppy. While Marvel's augmented reality does not necessarily embrace RCEP's notion of ergodic literature, it does not take place wholly in a digital environment, it nonetheless reinvents the comic book reader-text relationship using digital tools to do so.